You know what I like to do? And I trick my brain into thinking that everything's going to be all right and I'm going to win. I learned that before a job interview once. Yeah. Woo! It's a little victory pose. I got goosebumps just then. Dopamine, endorphins, a little oxytocin from the folks who are laughing because now I feel connected. I feel approval. I work for coffee and affirmations. Thank you so much. And thank you, Donnie. Donnie is one of our experts. I work for JBS International. We're a consultant company in North Bethesda, Maryland, and we're in a strategic partnership with Health Resources and Services Administration to provide training and technical assistance to rural communities. We've got treatment specialists, nurses, prescribers, harm reduction experts, recovery support services folks, social workers. We've got a deep bench of expertise at the ready, and had a chance to work with Caitlin from the planning grant for this RCorp grant, and it's very meaningful work, all from home, all on Zoom. So this is kind of weird being with human beings. It's delightful. I've got 4 screens at home and a rising desk and just my own little world. Okay, I'm here to talk to you about ways to engage in the national conversation, the local conversation about overdose, about addiction, ways to talk about it to help affect change, to increase partnerships, to reduce your own unintended biases that can get in the way of our awesome work that we're doing, because it happens. Because we're dealing with a public health crisis of epidemic proportions, a behavioral health crisis of epidemic proportions, a public safety debacle, but it also has a moral behavioral component that we've been socialized for decades to feel some kind of way about. No matter how much we've been trained, no matter how much science we have, and no matter how much we've even lived it. I'm a person thriving in sustained recovery from severe mental and substance use disorders for 18 years now, and I still harbor biases and assumptions and socialized common sense attitudes about certain things. Donnie admitted to you some of the biases that he held and some of the stigmatizing and pejorative language that he's used in the past. He admitted to you that's where he was, but folks met him where he was, and now he's a champion. I was the same way. I was not always this progressive social worker that you see before you now. I was raised in the mountains of western North Carolina, and I joined the service to escape working in a textile mill and living in a trailer, which was honestly a pretty awesome life until I joined the service. Donnie and I were both in the same war. He was a combat veteran. I'm a war veteran. I was in the Navy. I was naval intelligence out in the Indian Ocean. While he was pounding sand, I was telling him where not to go. But either way, we both, and I'm going to bring this up a little later when it comes to pejorative language and some of the language that we used during that war to describe both the people we were sent to liberate and the people who were invading their country. It's fascinating what we do with language, but I'm getting way ahead of myself just trying to show some teasers. That was like the trailer, and you're like, oh, snap. I'm sticking around for this film. I hope he just didn't play the whole movie, you know, like some do when they're not great movies. They'll just show the whole darn thing in 5 minutes, and well, there you go, like romantic comedies, right? I have to declare, I do declare, I'm only here because I want to be. No one is, I've got no dog in the fight other than trying to share my experience and hoping that it will empower folks to accomplish the missions you're set out to do. No one's in my pocket, I'm in no one's pocket, whatever the saying goes. Although, if all of y'all could come get you some of this. This is a hobby. And it's called No Thanks But Yes. It's a podcast. People on many, many pathways of recovery. Very diverse faces and voices. Now 35 episodes of just real laid-back conversations. And I think it started off as a pandemic hobby to get my creative on. But I think it's turned into something of a contact strategy, exposure to very diverse recovery experiences. And I try to keep things positive too. Chill conversations, and eventually, we don't talk a lot about the past, we talk about what you do for fun. So it's really upbeat, but it gets heavy. Really proud, Michael Botticelli. He was the former White House director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the first openly in recovery drug czar of the United States. And that was a fun little conversation. So come get you some, please help me out. Okay. Here's my agenda, and I think this will help us to provide more compassionate care, to speak more effectively about the issues that we're facing and the resources that we need, and less people will die and more people will find health, freedom, wellness, etc. It's important that we start about talking about why you use drugs, why you stimulate neurotransmitter activity for pleasure, for relief, for Friday night escape. We can become more empathic with the people we're serving who are having chaotic relationships with substances or pathological relationships, because we live on the spectrum, and it's a fact. I got me some last night at Mellow Mushroom. Yes, I did. And I'm not making light of this experience. I'm telling you, I went there with a mission to seek pleasure and relief and escape for a few moments. And in my history of food use, there are times when it has become a little bit chaotic and even pathological. I'm in a manageable relationship with it now, with occasional excess, you know? And I know maybe a lot of people can relate. Right on. Okay, cool. Why do some people? Well, I can do it. Yeah, man, I'm slamming beers with my buds. We're drinking on the weekends. But this fella, he's chasing cocaine every day. We're the same human being, but with specific vulnerabilities, specific risk factors. We know why some people experience addiction, and many of y'all probably already know this. But if we just all come together on some language, some ways of expressing it, our messaging gets a little more kind of unified maybe. Yeah, and I didn't invent any of this, by the way. It's folks who met me where I was. What is recovery? We have a presenter coming in this afternoon who's going to do a deeper dive on this, a couple presenters. I'm going to do a brief touch on recovery. Stigma is an issue that we're all engaged in trying to resolve. We're going to kind of come together on what it is and why it's important to address it, and what are some of the evidence-based tactics where we can measurably reduce stigma. And y'all are engaged in these activities as well. And I know I shared this information with Caitlin on day one. But a few details I want to get into about that, where we might accidentally fall short, and a couple national resources that might help. And how can you come make a difference? All right. So, why? Why do you use drugs? Why do I use drugs? Can anybody not relate with something up here? Barbecue and sweet tea, Lord. The dopamine. It feels good. Then it kind of feels bad, all right? Start to get some consequences, some negative consequences, and we pull back. To stay awake. I really love coffee. I have a high tolerance for coffee. And I use it. I use stimulants. I also use dark chocolate. I have to do a fair amount of writing, and I'm not a natural writer. I'm not a great writer. I'm a good writer, and it comes in cycles, like a visitation from the muse. And sometimes the dark chocolate is bait for her. And I do know I am using a drug. 85%, 1 bar, moderately, or square rather, shot of espresso. Productivity, right? And I can do that now too. I'm 18 years in sustained recovery, and the drugs that I do use now, and I'm speaking very broadly, I'm including lots of behaviors and foods and beverages, lots of things, and behaviors. I mentioned that, sorry. I have manageable relationships with these now. So recovery is a pretty awesome thing. Brains change through sustained recovery, increased connection, the obtaining of purpose in one's life, maybe even some spirituality. Starting to get into some more darker stuff to relieve emotional and physical pain. And this is part of my story and part of why I became vulnerable to compulsively using despite consequences. But even then, there may be folks, you've had a bad day. You've had a bad day. You're processing it, you're talking it over with your partner, and you're going to have a glass of red wine. And you're going to watch The Bachelor. Mindless TV, a little shameless. Emotional pain abates. There's deeper and more tenacious emotional and physical pain. There's emotional loss. I have experienced profound emotional loss in recovery and have taken delight in the evidence that recovery is real, in that I have experienced some of the most painful experiences in recovery and have not had to run from them, have been able to kind of face them head on together with family and friends, and have watched the pain diminish, have watched the loss get filled, and have acquired the wisdom from the experience. Whew, pretty awesome stuff. And to escape traumatic memories. This was a big one. Those of us who have experienced trauma, little t, big T, I don't know about you, but it has been common for the people I have served and for myself to have those memories be intrusive and unwelcome at times. And increasing my dopamine levels and endorphin levels and engaging in other ritualistic behaviors has been helpful. Not sustainable over time, but in the moment, in the acute crisis, helpful. I have other skills now to do that, and I learned those through a recovery process. Cool. That's why we use drugs. That's why we use substances. Not a mystery. Part of the human experience, a very common behavior for many of us. We can relate. But what about the person? What in the world? What about the person who compulsively seeks it, does it, uses it, despite negative consequences, despite hitting what we thought would have been a bottom? We need not talk about bottoms because most of us don't know bottoms. People have experienced tremendous pain and loss, the loss of their children, the loss of their goals and dreams, the loss of limbs and lives. And yet we still compulsively seek, we still compulsively use. That's hard to relate to. That's incredibly hard to relate to. So we will go back to our socially acquired, culturally acquired common sense. They're bad people. They're bad people, they're weak people, they weren't raised right, something. There's got to be a reason. This is so bizarre. They must be evil, something. Or, and y'all know these answers, I'm preaching to the choir, you know this. Or, there's a more complex definition where we can go upstream and save a bunch of starfish. I can't believe Donnie, where's Donnie? Is he still here? He pulled out the starfish thing. Oh yes, that's right. I always got to make sure my stomach's not out. So, why? Why not everyone? Because one of the big mistakes that we've made in drug policy and behavioral health policy and justice policy is that drugs cause addiction. A substance causes addiction, and we know that, and our former SBI fellow will be the first one to come and tell you that there's lots of people out there using drugs that are not experiencing addiction. As we commonly agree, the definition is to compulsively seek or use despite negative consequences. Not everybody who uses experiences that pathological response. So of the percentage of people who do, what do they have in common? And y'all know this, right? You've seen this in one way or another. Data have a variety of numbers, so I'm just throwing some middle-of-the-road averages up there. Family history of mental and substance use disorders. It's not a predictor, it's not a forecast. My 4 children, don't have substance use disorder. How about them apples? However, it is a risk factor. It creates vulnerability. We don't completely understand it, but it's there. Co-occurring mental disorders. Co-occurring mental disorders. Y'all know what mental disorders are, right? Yeah, it's there. That's probably a low number. Yeah, nods in the room. It's a conservative estimate. We know so much more about trauma now and the role that it plays in lots of negative health outcomes, both physical and psychological. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, as a predictor of a potentially pathological relationship with the seeking of pleasure, relief, and escape. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Dislocation, isolation, lack of purpose, and this one's not showing up because I screwed up. I don't know, it's probably all white or something. 90% of us who experience substance use disorder began using substances before we were 18 years old. So exposure. Primary prevention works. Prevention works. Treatment is effective, has effect, potentially. Recovery is possible. Prevention works. Treatment is effective. Recovery is possible. Let's limit the exposure. So when I have my story, when I'm born the summer of love into an absolute madhouse of family history of mental and substance use disorders and violence and trauma. And by the time I'm thinking about going to kindergarten, I've already got a high ACE score and already coloring my perception of the world. By the time I'm in middle school, I'm already dealing with emotional dysregulation. I'm dealing with disappointment. I'm dealing with stress. I'm dealing with intrusive traumatic memories through drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, and I'm starting to smoke weed. And it's working. It's almost working. It's almost working for me. And this is a time when I should be learning wise skills from mom and grandma about delayed gratification, right? Consoling myself, finding safety within my home or finding safety with myself, of the pleasures of subtle joy, subtle pleasure, like the pleasure of just playing G.I. Joes with your boyfriend, your boyfriend in the backyard, you know, those little things. But I wasn't experiencing those, you know, sublime joys. I was ingesting substances that were a shortcut to gratification, to pleasure, to safety, to security. And while I'm doing that, I'm not learning those skills. I'm not developing, I'm not flexing those. Disordered learning theoretical model of substance use disorder. I'm in high school, and now hindsight tells me that I was very much deftly managing emotional dysregulation. Already I was suffering with a recalcitrant mood disorder that manifests itself through diagnosis much later in life. I thought I was just a really bad, weird, angry, and sad kid. So I'm a case study for really all of those vulnerabilities packed into one, all of those risk factors packed into one. And the responses were often consequences driven. And we know that addiction is the compulsive seeking using despite consequences. And I was often punished, and a lot of negative messaging around my lack of morality, my lack of willpower and control, forming a devastating self-image of a completely inept and poorly designed bad boy. And that's what I came into recovery toting with me. So I wasn't real quick to ask for help. But I did on several occasions. I will say that initially the interventions that I received were sometimes inappropriate. Like, let's say I'm being prescribed a medication, it was the wrong medication, or it was an inadequate dose, not long enough, or it didn't have the chronic illness recovery management component to it. It was like, okay, we gave you 2 weeks of this, keep your nose clean, Mr. Man. Yeah, you know better now, do better, right? But I just spoke to you about, you know, decades of trauma and behaviors and maladaptive behaviors that were almost working. I finally did get a pretty awesome treatment event. 18 years ago, October 12th, 2004, I was at one last jumping off point. See, right now what I'm doing is I'm storytelling, but I'm getting into the weeds. It's not a Lifetime movie of rom-com, beginning, middle, end, you know, rising, denouement, whatever. It's complicated, but I'm telling you a story that's supporting good policy and something that'll work for lots of people. I had immediate access 2, adequate and appropriate evidence-based co-occurring disorders, trauma-informed treatment. I was married to a lovely nurse, had good insurance, and I got lucky and went into this treatment event. I'm so happy about that. And then insurance tried to kick me out. 2 weeks in, said I was all better. The doctor said, I'm going to let you stay here on our dime. Right? This was a pricey event. And not everybody gets that. So that was a bit of privilege. The fellow was fond of me. Maybe it was some hustle, I don't know. But I got to stay, and then they recognized also that this isn't an acute care issue. This isn't a moral, theoretical model of substance use disorder. It's chronic illness. It calls for recovery management. They stepped me down into outpatient services, psychiatric services, primary medical care. They took care of me. They connected me with my people. But they also recognized that I needed diverse people. That I was an Appalachian boy, right? With trauma and trouble connecting with folks. And a lot of us come into this very complicated, but sometimes we'll get thrown into one group of people, maybe half a dozen fellas in one church basement, and we're like, that's your new people. You know, and sometimes our hands are tied in getting folks connected with their people to trudge for the rest of their lifetime. But I was lucky that I had 500 different ones because I settled in Raleigh after I got out of the Navy. So I had a lot of choice there. And that's not a big city. So like some of the bigger cities, you got thousands of choices to go find your people, people you align with, people you're comfortable with, to start marching that decades-long journey towards thriving recovery. I had lots of choice. Family, friends, and allies supported me. I had an amazing wife. She really was. She was medically savvy, but she also, she really met me where I was. And I got to tell you, people don't transform in recovery overnight. If drugs were the problem, we would. And there's laughter in the room because we know, honestly, I'm probably ashamed of nearly my first 5 years of my recovery. I was a jerk, you know? And then I started learning more skills about how to connect with people, about how to be less afraid and more vulnerable, how to be more patient, how to have delayed gratification in my life, and how not to always feel like I needed to be right because I was afraid everyone would leave me. So all these things I started learning that drugs kept me from learning. My employer said, go off to treatment, go get you some, we're gonna save this chair for you when you get back, we'll ease you back in. This is long before we had, you know, recovery-friendly workplace, which is awesome, and we're going to learn more about that this afternoon. I just had one dude that got it for some reason, and corporate supported him, you know. I imagine I had laws on my side, but that didn't stop people from firing people experiencing addiction in the past. Returned to my home, my minivan, went to all the outpatient services and all the meetings and went to work in my home where my family got all the alcohol out of the house for now. My wife called and threatened my drug dealer when I went to treatment. I met him a while later, and he said, I had to change everything after your wife called me. It was a funny story. She scared the hell out of him. She sure did. Anyway, recovery visibility. That's more people who once had a chaotic relationship with substances, no longer do. They're not just trudging or dog paddling, they're actually thriving. They're teachers and nurses and peer support specialists, political leaders. They're your neighbors, friends, they're everybody, and they're saying, yeah, me too. I'm in recovery. Recovery visibility. Recovery is possible. There's hope. There's hope more than just trudging. It inspired me to come and get me more. And when I wanted to come and get me more, I had no arbitrary barriers in my way. I wanted to become a counselor, like a lot of folks do, or a peer support specialist. And I was able to get student loans because I never got arrested. I was very lucky. It was privilege and luck, and I didn't have those barriers. I had a lot going my way. So I went to school. I started off in community college, got a job as peer at a methadone clinic, and then went to long-term residential recovery place. And I was able to interview at all these places too, and they do rigorous background checks, and that wasn't a problem, I was honorably discharged from the service as well because they were fond of me. They got it too, honestly, that I had served quite honorably, but they were also like, it's time for you to go, Otis, right? Yeah. Because I was also lucky that there was such a liberal drinking culture at the time, because I was using drugs in Western North Carolina before I joined the service, and I could seamlessly transition into a relationship with alcohol, which was not only legal, but it was also culturally valued if you had high tolerance for it, as I did as a Western North Carolinian. And then opportunity. Lots of opportunity. That's the recipe. That's in my messaging. If I'm just briefly telling my story, I'm going to keep it really smaller and shorter, whatever, before people fall off. Because people really want to hear, I was saved. It's like right on. No, there's so much more. Now I'm going to get into storytelling in a minute. Okay. Recovery. We're going to talk a lot more about recovery a little bit later on. I am a SAMHSA guy. This process of wellness, improved wellness, this achieving of self-sufficiency and autonomy, this progressing towards self-actualization. What's my purpose on this blue marble? This is what everyone in this room is walking right now, in recovery or not. This is the human experience. This just journey of getting right, getting connected, getting strong, finding out why I'm here. I like that. I'm on board with that. Speaking of recovery, it's a really super big community. It's bigger than 12-step. 12-step is a core identity within the ecumenical culture of recovery. For nearly 9 decades, shouldering the burden of much of our community-based recovery connection. But there's 21 million people in the United States alone who had a problematic relationship with substances and no longer do, and consider themselves to be in recovery. The global census for AA is 2 million. AA and NA combined is less than 5 million. Most of them are in Iran, in Narcotics Anonymous. NA blew up in Iran, by the way. Pretty awesome. So big culture. Social math graphic. Y'all have experienced a little bit of a dip in mortality associated with opioid use disorder. This is y'all's biggest stadium. 60,000 folk. We could potentially be on track to doubling this occupancy in overall overdose death by the time we get next measures in. Previous measures were around 108,000. That's a lot of our friends, neighbors, country folk. So that's a visual representation of the severity of the mortality crisis we are facing. It's a public health crisis, a mortality crisis. People are dying how can we stop them from dying? Public health. Setting recovery aside, setting behavioral health aside, how can we stop people? How do we stop the bleed? From the CDC website, Evidence-Based Strategies for Preventing Overdose, what is working in the United States? It's a descriptive list. It's not a prescriptive, this is what y'all ought to do. This is surveying what is having some impact on mortality. Getting naloxone to the people who need it most, which is everybody. Make it rain naloxone. Not just treatment, CJ, first responders, but people who use substances, the people who they use with, their family members, friends, and allies. Make it rain naloxone. Lowest barrier, lowest hanging fruit in this public health crisis. Y'all are doing it. Nicely done. Opioid agonist medications. As a person in 18 years of recovery, something that I previously held an uninformed bias against, and I'll admit that to you. My first job was in an opioid treatment program as a Alcoholics Anonymous member on fire with serenity with 5 years of recovery. I did so much harm in that setting, I can't even tell you. Jeez. But I learned so much since then, and the data show, right? What do data show about opioid agonist medication and its impact on mortality? Anybody? It reduces death by 50%. So from medications for opioid use disorder as overdose prevention from a public health lens, I understand there are entanglements. I understand that it may not be the life we hope everyone will have, but from a purely public health soldier lens, if we want to stop recalcitrant death, people who are appropriately prescribed opioid agonist medication for severe opioid use disorder, take it, give it. I recently posted something on LinkedIn that just caught fire, and it just came to me because my primary care prescriber prescribes ACE inhibitor and diuretic to me as stroke prevention. She very liberally prescribes lisinopril, HCTZ to me as stroke prevention. Very low barrier for getting it. I probably need to see her twice a year. She does not come at me with barriers saying, Donald, the scale, bro, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. There's a behavioral component to hypertension that has potentially moral value to it as well, and an impact on family members and an impact on taxpayers too. Why aren't we getting all up in the face of people experiencing hypertension that they're not engaging complicitly in holistic recovery, including behavioral changes? Stop eating fried chicken and pie, Donald, stop watching so much Netflix, or I'm gonna have to cut off your lisinopril. So this is, she's in line with her license. I mean, she may want more for me, and she celebrates those positive changes with me because I am losing a little bit of weight. I am walking 3 miles a day. Come on. I bought a stand-up desk, so I'm up and down during the day a bit. I'm progressing slowly. I am. So MOUD is overdose prevention. I spent a long time on that because I really wanted to drive that home, because I know some people feel some kind of way about it. And syringe service programs, our resistance to those, hear me now, believe me later, our resistance to those is socialized, culturally acquired common sense. We're like that. Given needles, isn't it gonna? It's socially acquired, so culturally acquired common sense. It's not common sense. Data show, and Donnie shared that with you, 5 times more likely to initiate some kind of care. Not sharing needles, lower HIV, Hep C infection, et cetera, data, settled science. I don't say that very often, settled science, because I'm a pessimist also, but SSPs are settled science. We can argue about it later. I'm going to have office hours too, by the way. Donnie's going to jump next door at one point, and I'm going to be 1:45 to 2:45, I think. I don't need my glasses. All right. And as far as the science supporting MOUD, opioid agonist medications, I always throw in the first study, Heroin as a Metabolic Disease, 1967, one of the 10 studies that shook the addiction world. If anyone in here has gone to school to study addiction, usually you got some old faded mimeograph sheet that said 10 studies that shook the addiction world, and this is one of them. We've known for coming on 56 years now that not only does methadone diminish, overdose or heroin use, but also socially productive and living as normal citizens. Maybe not normal by your lens or your, privileged or judgmental yardstick. Throw that out. By individual goals in these treatment programs, opioid agonist medication, neonatal abstinence syndrome. There are people talking, pregnant and parenting people out of taking opioid agonist medications because you have a socially acquired, culturally acquired common sense against it. When data show, no mama, stay. You're doing a good thing for you and the baby. Right on? And what an affirmation. I'm getting ready to put out a training that has a story of a woman who was so shamed by her obstetrician after going in and his discovering that she was on methadone. She was so proud. It breaks my heart, but follow the science. Many of us in here have credentials with ethical codes to them. Assiduously practice evidence-based medicine. When in doubt, follow the science and work on your heart and your head later. But follow the science for now. And you'll deal with much less regret, a lot of the regret that Donnie and I deal with when we reflect on our former selves. Stigma. Stigma is ancient. It is a mark. It is an attribute. I told you I would talk about, Donnie and I in the service. We engaged in marking folk. An attribute, whether it was the color of their skin or their national origin or their religious identity, and discredited the rest of the content of their character. They were down to a label. And that provided psychic armor for the things that Donnie was in the sandbox doing, and I was on a ship telling him where not to go. Yeah. But we're not at war with people who use substances, and we don't want to cause harm to people who use substances. So that's why we don't use pejorative language, even around the water cooler, even among each other. And it robs people of happiness, and it marginalizes folks. It's prejudice. Stigma is prejudice. Prejudice, when left untended and unexplored, turns into discrimination, turns into robbing people of their potential. So we all have prejudices, we all have biases. Let's explore them. That's a whole other training that I have that's a lot of fun in a safe space. And internalized stigma, I talked to you about some of the messaging, the stereotypes, the words, the attitudes. I soaked them up, I took them on board, and data are showing that people with internalized stigma, even if they do seek help, have a tendency not to get well sometimes. I really don't deserve to get well. If I seek help, there's still something in me that's inhibiting my wellness. It's fascinating. Amy Drapolsky, check that out. Required reading. If we're going to talk about stigma, it can often be like this ethereal, arcane, ambiguous topic, but it is very much something that has been drawn on a map so you can target where it is in your community and what the appropriate intervention might be. This is a PDF online waiting for you to come and get you some. The drivers are those biases that we all have. So all of the biases are present. They're socialized into us, our perceptions of drug users. Our perceptions of drug users. They swim around in here. We got them at home. We got them from the TV. We got them from living in this country. And then we have facilitators. And that's what lets these biases come out and see the light of day and realize, oh, I'm welcome here. I'm welcome here. There is a policy landscape, a cultural landscape, attitudes and behaviors where I can run free, right? And then we mark people. We target them, they get marked. We have stigma experiences, we have discriminatory practices, we have negative outcomes, increased mortality and morbidity, less help seeking, laws on the books that don't make any sense. So we can take a look around us and assess what's going on and then target. I like to target the drivers a lot. Identifying and exploring implicit bias in a safe space. We all have them. Let's get them out. Let's dust them off. Let's admit to having them. And let's also acknowledge how they get in the way of the goals we've set for ourselves as credentialed professionals, as good citizens, as good neighbors, as good family members. I don't want to be hijacked by a prejudice. Say one thing and do another. Here's another great book. This is a compendium of evidence-based practices throughout the country. They've been measured, the impacts, different strategies that we can engage in. So read that book. One of the tactics is accurate and non-stigmatizing language. You've been hit over the head with this a lot. You may have responded, why do we gotta be so PC? What the hell? It's not. This is a data-supported, this is an academic endeavor. We have ascertained which types of words elicit a negative reaction in general public, even in behavioral health provider public. And Recovery Research Institute, recoveryanswers.org, in response to a call for unified behavioral language, have created the Addictionary. The Addictionary. If you're curious what a word means in your space, you can find a full academic definition for it, but with a flag potentially. Like, why is there a flag on substance abuse? I shouldn't have to tell anyone in this room, but I will. And it'll take you to either the smoke and gun data or the emerging data supporting why there's a negative valence associated with some words. And some words can have effects on either inhibiting help seeking. Folks are hearing this word and they're less likely to seek help. Or, and this is pernicious, true, and horrifying, some words hijack our brain. We're ethical providers of compassionate care since we were kids, putting Band-Aids on our Barbies. But we've discovered if we identify a patient by a specific word in our head, we are less likely to provide the most therapeutic care and may have an inclination towards some punitive responses. Just the word. Just the word. I do not want to be hijacked by rhetoric. I'm tired of that. It happens all the time in politics, in marketing, but in my space, I want my values and my practice to align. And I don't want my thinking, here comes another drug addict, to keep me from assiduously practicing evidence-based, compassionate, and ethical care. Trust me when I say that. This is not me preaching. These are data supported. Some of them are emerging. Some of them seem common sense. But these are my recommendations to you. Not only do I say more people will seek help, but you'll be more inclined to invite that help more and provide better care, more in line with your credential and your ethical code. Right on. And I'm available if you want to get into the weeds on any of these, because I am seriously like seconds away from being out of time, right? Yeah, yep. Telling our story. Contact strategy is potent. I'm doing it now. Hopefully you don't hate me. You've got a little bit of respect for me, but you've also folded in the fact that I lived with severe mental and substance use disorders, that I was on the other side of the tracks in Appalachian, North Carolina for some time. I'm that person, I'm this person. How can I be both people? Contact strategy, your empathy rises, your stigmatizing attitudes and behaviors diminish, and we're connecting. Faces and Voices of Recovery has a way of telling stories. This data supported to leverage your lived expertise to promote good policy and better connection with folks. There are a way of doing it, though, that could potentially be harmful. This is Bill White. He's famous for saying, there are many pathways to addiction recovery and all are cause for celebration, and this is true. I celebrate everyone's recovery pathway. Come get you some. Come get in this big tent of 21 million people. Let's make the world a better place. Prison saved my life. I'm like, ooh, shh. Hold on. Oh, come here. Oh, I love you, man. I love you. Shut up. Not really. I mean, but like, what else? You know, so that may be potent, right? It may make your heart pound, but is it in line with the policy priorities that you have as an advocacy organization, as a community? Do you want more people in prison? Because Johnny, just with his compelling story, engaged in some confirmation bias through his anecdote, right? So I can ask Johnny, what happened after incarceration? Why were you incarcerated? Lots of stuff, and then I'll learn about reentry programs. I'll learn about recovery supportive housing. I'll learn about second chance employers and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, cool. These are reactive policies. In the current drug policy climate, we want to go ahead and get more of those. All right, Johnny, come on, come get you some. Maybe not talk about, the blessings of incarceration so much, even though that's your truth. This is tough for me, because I'm a person in recovery, and Johnny's in the tent, and I love him, and I want to celebrate his recovery, but I'm not going to elevate his story to a national level. You feel me? And the other one, and this may hit you kind of hard, and I'll leave it here, to God be the glory. Now, that's a tough one to hear here, and I'm a deeply spiritual man as well, but I don't lead with the chin on that one when I'm leveraging my story, right? I believe in the evidence-supported potency of faith in prevention and recovery support services. I am not one to promote as a primary intervention for a chronic behavioral health illness. It may work for some people. It worked for Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll use him as an example of really what not to do. I'm sorry, this may hurt your feelings, but he went to the New York Medical Society to tell his story, and he told his story of the white light experience at Towns Hospital. And when you read it, you're like, Lord, just the light and the air and the chorus of angels and everything. And then you're like, wait, you just spoke to a room full of doctors. What confirmation bias that it's a moral issue and salvation is the answer, which may be true for some people, but on a policy level, is that what we want to promote through contact strategy? I can talk to people who say, to God be the glory, and I say, I madly respect your humility. You're probably afraid to say the hard work that you put into it as well, but let's talk about, and then I'll hear about recovery supportive housing, recovery-friendly workplace, second chance employers, evidence-based treatment, pharmacotherapy. Dude, I thought God saved you. Well, God invented buprenorphine. I'm like, okay. Let's get into the weeds. I'm sorry, I got into that, but it's critical as everyone is leveraging stories to tell, building anti-stigma campaigns around videos of people telling their stories. Try to get into the weeds around things that you can put into your policy priorities to promote in your state to get policymakers, funders to rally behind. Confirmation bias is, it was God in prison. Like, well, that's the policy we got now. Let's keep doing it. All right? I'm sorry if I offended anyone. And apologize to my mom. Advocacy organization, check out Recovery Advocacy Project at recoveryvoices.com. 21 million people, family members, friends, allies, all speaking in unity on issues, educating. Beautiful thing. Another one is education. And this is complicated. I used to just put like one website up here, but substance use disorder is complicated. And if you're just leaning into the hijacked brain theoretical model, if you're just talking about the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex, you're missing a whole lot. It's complicated. And I told you how complicated my story of addiction and my story of recovery are. These are some books I highly recommend. These books have changed my life. And I'll probably have another set a couple years from now, but these are everything to me right now. Thank you.